Good morning. Warm welcome to the joint event co-organized by the Austrian Academy of Sciences, our host here, by the United Nations Development Programme, UNDP, and International Institute for Applied Systems Analysis, IIASA. Very warm welcome to the audience here in the room and to the audience that joins us online. Dear guests, my name is Elena Rovinskaya. I'm Principal Research Scholar and Program Director for Advancing Systems Analysis Program at IIASA, and I will be moderating this event. Today we mark the Austrian launch of the 2023-2024 Human Development Report, titled Breaking the Gridlock, Reimagining Cooperation in a Polarized World. The keynote presentation will be delivered by Pedro Conceicao, Director of the UNDP Human Development Report Office, followed by flash talks, panel discussion, and questions and remarks from the audience. Please, the audience, prepare your comments and feedback. We look forward to engaging with you through this event. We will explore the crucial role of human agency in sustainable development today. We live in an ever more interconnected world, as demonstrated by the variety of phenomena, ranging from digitalization to pandemics, you name it. And yet, despite this deepening connection, our efforts to address critical global challenges such as climate change, sustainable development goals, and peace have been frustratingly slow. And in some cases, they face a growing backlash, polarization, and mistrust. 2023-2024 Human Development Report provides pathways for addressing this gridlock. The keynote presentation delivered by Pedro Conceicao will elaborate on how reimagining cooperation and achieving effective collective action in the face of global challenges requires enhanced human agency. Building on the last year's successful event, Human Development, Sustainability and Agency, today's discussions will further examine the concept of sustainable agency, where we move beyond self-interest to positively influence the well-being of others, future generations, and even non-human life forms. We look forward to hearing from our distinguished speakers, panelists, and the audience as they share their insights on this critical topic. Thank you for joining us, and we hope today's discussions inspire new ideas and approaches to building a more cooperative and sustainable future. Welcome once again to this event. Thank you very much. And now I would like to proceed to the welcoming remarks from representatives of 3 organizing institutions in this event. And let me first invite Mr. Peter Huber, Director General for Development at the Federal Ministry for European and International Affairs of the Republic of Austria, to deliver his welcoming remarks. Please.
Thank you very much. Dear members of the Academy, dear Dr. Lips, I'm very honored to be invited again to speak at the launch of UNDP's latest Human Development Report. I would like to give a special welcome to Mr. Pedro Conceicao, Director of the UNDP Human Development Report Office, who authors the reports, and I'm very much looking forward to your presentation. We had already a very interesting discussion yesterday. UNDP is one of the most important partners of Austria's development cooperation. This cooperation is not just about the implementation of projects, but also about UNDP's leading role concerning the Sustainable Development Goals and UNDP's analytical capacity. I would therefore also like and give a special thanks to the Institute for Applied System Analysis for once again organizing this event and for its important role in the scientific sector. Last year, we concluded that we all had the feeling that the world has become more polarized, more fragmented, more confrontational, and the impact on the rules-based international order and the implementation of the sustainable development goals worldwide is profound. Breaking the gridlock, reimagining cooperation in a polarized world, the title of this year's Human Development Report, illustrates that despite a historic high of the overall Human Development Index, the inequalities are ever growing too. 18 of the 35 least developed countries have yet to reach pre-pandemic levels of 2019. The same picture is painted by several other United Nations reports. For example, only 17% of the Sustainable Development Goals are on track to be achieved by 2030. More than a third has stalled or even regressed. So, it proves the impact is and was and is profound, and it will continue to be profound. Therefore, stock taking and regular monitoring of where we stand and how we have to proceed, just as the Human Development Report does, is indispensable if we truly want a better future for all. Austria recently undertook a similar exercise. Our second voluntary national review on progress towards the SDGs was compiled over 15 months and presented in New York this July at the high-level political forum. We came to the conclusion that despite our good standing internationally, after all, we are 6th worldwide for SDG implementation. Despite this good standing, significant challenges still remain, especially concerning SDG 12, responsible consumption, SDG 13, climate action, and SDG 15, life on land. Our voluntary national report highlights concrete examples for a wide range of stakeholders in Austria on how to tackle these challenges. To find practical solutions on a global level to the challenges of our time, like climate, migration, and sustainable development, needs common efforts to be successful. In this respect, protecting and strengthening the multilateral system is of particular importance. And we believe that this is not only important for Austria, but should be a responsibility of all UN members. We also strongly believe that SDG 17, the partnership principle, is key to achieve our ambitious goals to overcome the challenges ahead of us. And in this spirit of solidarity, Austria substantially increased its funding for international humanitarian aid and climate finance, and tried to make a contribution to the various threats to global security. To guide our collective efforts, I'm now very much looking forward to the presentation of Director Conceicao's Human Development Report. I wish you all a most lively and interesting discussion and a fruitful day here at the Academy of Sciences. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Huber, for your very warm welcome and for nicely summarizing what's ahead of us now and for being with us again here today. Now let me please invite Professor Karen Lips, Deputy Director General of the International Institute for Applied Systems Analysis, to deliver her remarks.
Thank you, Elena. Thank you, Mr. Huber. I want to offer also a very warm welcome to all the attendees here today, not only our diplomatic community, but also our scientific community of Austria. I am delighted that this event connects the scientific and international policy-making communities and look forward to seeing even more interactions in the coming months. Last year, I understand a similar event was co-organized by IIASA, the United Nations Development Program, and the Austrian Academy of Sciences to mark the Austrian launch of the Human Development Report from last year, the 2021-2022 Uncertain Times, Unsettled Lives, Shaping the Future in a Transforming World. And that featured flash talks and a podium discussion focusing on human agency as a foundation for sustainable human development. That was an incredibly successful event, both in terms of the audience interest, as well as the many important insights highlighted that will inform our future research at IIASA and elsewhere. This was part of the IIASA Transformation Within Reach initiative led by Elena and Luis Gomez Echeverri. Today, we continue and expand the dialogue from that meeting on these very important matters. We have seen that collective action on challenges ranging from climate change mitigation to peace and security is frustratingly slow or stymied altogether. Lack of trust and polarization, both associated with insecurity, exacerbate the gridlock. Shared, interlinked global challenges like the pandemic and its recovery are outpacing our willingness and our institutions' capacities to respond to them. Why, despite all our riches and technologies, are we so stuck? How do we get unstuck? Is it possible to mobilize action to address globally shared challenges in a world that is intensively polarized? Co-organized by IIASA, the UNDP, and the Austrian Academy of Sciences, this event marks the Austrian launch of the new Human Development Report 2023-2024, Breaking the Gridlock, Reimagining Cooperation in a Polarized World, with a keynote presentation by Pedro Conceicao, Director of the UNDP Human Development Report Office, followed by flash talks and a panel discussion focusing on human agency as a foundation for sustainable development. We will listen to these issues and offer a platform for strategic discussion on how to move beyond narrow, zero-sum thinking and support cooperation, even as we have diverse interests and views. In closing, I want to offer a very warm thank you to Christian Korbel, the IIASA Council Member for Austria and member of the Austrian Academy of Sciences. Thank you for providing this beautiful space and supporting this important dialogue on the topic of human agency and sustainable development among IIASA, the Austrian Academy, and the UNDP. It is important that we join forces in addressing the topic of sustainable transformation and that we work with the UN system and diplomatic corps to bring more science to bear on this critical topic. Thanks to Pedro Conceicao, Director of the UNDP Human Development Report Office, for collaborating with IIASA on the topic of human agency and sustainable development. This has been a very productive collaboration, and we look forward to expanding upon it in the future. Thanks to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Austria for supporting this event and for hosting IIASA in Austria. Thanks to the Ban Ki-moon Center for Global Citizens for your continued collaboration with IIASA and for your contribution. Thanks to all of you, the wonderful speakers who joined us today. We are all looking forward to hearing your wonderful presentations. And finally, I want to especially offer thanks to my colleagues from IIASA for our assistance in organizing this wonderful event, and thank you again for this opportunity.
Thank you so much, Karen. And now, indeed, we are really privileged to be here in this very nice historical building of the Austrian Academy of Sciences. And let me invite Professor Christian Korbel, who represents here Austrian Academy of Sciences, but he holds so many different posts, including professor at the University of Vienna and, as Karen mentioned, the council member for Austria at IIASA.
Thank you very much, Elena. Yes, I kind of represent the host institution here, the Austrian Academy of Sciences. I also have the privilege of being a full member of the Academy, so we actually meet in this room quite often and in the neighbor room, which is even bigger and even maybe nicer. Yeah, the Austrian Academy of Sciences is the member organization to IIASA here in Austria. And so I have the privilege of chairing also the IIASA, the Austrian IIASA committee. and as such, I'm representing Austria on the Council. I didn't prepare any remarks, but I just want to say a couple or address a couple of topics. The first one is that the point of this get-together, but also the point of IIASA in general, is to connect the dots, so to say. We live not only in a rather difficult world, but we also live in a world where science is making a lot of progress, but in a way we're leaving the people behind. And I think this is something where both the Academy, we have made lots of efforts in a variety of topics. I have another hat. I'm chair of the Geosciences Committee of IIASA, of the Academy, and so we're trying to put topics out to the public to try and make them understand science and why science is important and what is important about certain topics. And this is also what IIASA does. And so when you just look at the various topics, research themes that IIASA does, those are very important things in connecting the dots. And what I think our efforts have to go to is to make these points understandable to the public, because the world that is difficult, hostile in a way, nationalities mean more than people, it seems sometimes. I think by explaining to the general public, not just by telling them we must do something or we have to or something, nobody can hear this anymore, but explain in simple terms where the problems are, what science has done and can do to alleviate these problems. And I think understanding follows. People are much more susceptible to doing something about a problem if they understand that they themselves are affected. Which brings me, of course, the Anthropocene is in the title of this presentation. As a geoscientist, I'm not convinced that the Anthropocene as such can already be declared a geological era. This is usually done after the fact, when we know what happened. My own research has to do, for example, with impacts of extraterrestrial bodies. So I've studied the event that killed the dinosaurs 66 million years ago. We know exactly what happened. We can define the age of the Cretaceous very well by the fossils that are there, by the geological record that is there, etc., etc. We don't know that yet about the humans. We don't even know if we're going to be here in 1,000 years, which in geological terms is nothing, right? And you wouldn't even find 1,000 years is what, a millimeter of geological record or something like that. So what have we done? We've done a lot of not good things. And we see that the planet is responding. And one of the ways the planet has been responding, we saw the last few days over the weekend with this terrible extreme weather. And of course it's a result of climate change, and of course it has something to do with humans. And anybody who denies that, I don't know, is living on another planet. But maybe if they don't understand that fully, we need to do more as scientists to convey that to the public. Don't demand of them something, don't preach to them, but explain to them. I think that's the important thing. And I can say these things about this weekend's events with some authority, because we had our own house flooded as well. And there's nothing you can do about that, and the only thing you can say, there are people who are worse off. But short-term changes won't affect these problems, because these are longer-term things. But we start by telling the people, trying to explain what we do and why we find that also so interesting and important. And with that, thank you very much, and have a good event today.
Thank you so much, Christian, for giving such a compelling motivation for what we are doing here today. I think with that, we can now proceed to the next section in our program. Pedro. Of course, we are here to mark the launch of the new Human Development Report, that's for sure. Please, welcome on stage.
It's a great honor and pleasure to be doing this for a second year with IIASA, with Elena, Karen, with the Austrian Academy of Sciences. Thank you, Christian. And I'm also very pleased to, again, have the honor of having Ambassador Huber with us. And we already had a very interesting conversation yesterday. So what I'll try to do, briefly, so that we can go straight to the flash talks, is to give you a sense of what we found in our latest Human Development Report. And the Human Development Report is always an invitation to all of us to take a look in the mirror and make an assessment as to how the world is doing, but how the world is doing from a very specific angle and perspective, from this perspective of human development. What is human development? Very simple idea, very simple notion, that people should be allowed to live their lives to their full potential. And one of the ways in which we assess whether we're making progress towards expanding human development or not is by looking at some metrics, some indicators, one of which is the Human Development Index. It's not the only indicator that we consider, but it's one that we rely on because it's a fairly comprehensive indicator that brings together the performance of the economy of countries, but also how countries are doing when it comes to achievements in health and education, things that people care about. And there are some good news in our latest Human Development Report, because we find that after a dip, a decline for the first time ever in the Human Development Index globally, the average for the world in 2020 and 2021, there's been a rebound. And in fact, the level of the Global Human Development Index today is the highest ever, the highest on record. But there are two very worrying trends or features of this evolution. The first is the one that you see on this slide. So you see that the evolution of the Global Average Human Development Index has been a steady trend of improvement. The graph starts in 1990, at the turn of the century, but if we go back to 1990, when we started publishing the Human Development Report, you can see that it goes essentially like this. But you see that there was this unprecedented decline in 2020 and 2021, a rebound, but you can see that the line of improvement of the Global Human Development Index lies below the one we would expect to be on had we not suffered a decline. So that difference between the pre-2019 trend and the actual HDI trend represents a loss in human development, a loss in human potential. Not only lives that were lost, most dramatically, but also a loss in opportunities, in this ability of people to live lives to their full potential. Perhaps even more concerning, if the trend continues like this, if it doesn't sort of flips upward, then this loss can become very long-lasting and permanent. So I emphasize this point because sometimes the narrative about what we went through as an international community in each of our countries, in each of our families, households, sometimes is seen as a blip, as a shock from which we're recovering. I think we need to be careful that the recovery was at best partial, because we may confront the potential for these long-term, potentially permanent losses in human development. And secondly, and Ambassador Huber has already alluded to this, we've seen that the gap between the countries at the top of the Human Development Index and at the bottom of the Human Development Index, so the difference in the Human Development Index between countries at the top and at the bottom, after declining for many years, which you see on the blue part of the line, is now increasing. What does this mean? This is the negation of the idea of development. Development is about making sure, or making efforts to ensure that countries are closer together when it comes to standards of living, when it comes to human development. And we did very well for many years, for decades. We were on this process of convergence, but now that has been reversed. And we're leaving the poorest and most vulnerable of our international community behind. The 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, that includes the Sustainable Development Goals, has a pledge. a pledge to leave no one behind, and a pledge to reach the furthest behind first. So we are falling short in fulfilling that pledge. And this is something that we see not only across countries, but something that we also see within countries. For instance, within the context of the European Union, the former Italian Prime Minister Enrico Letta, we spoke about that yesterday, Ambassador, issued a report to the Commission 6 months ago, in which he noted that 1/3 of the European population, 1/3 of the population of the European Union, to be more precise, is in regions that are being left behind. So this happens not only across countries, but within countries. So the report asks, why are we in this situation? And of course, there are many reasons, but the one that we emphasize is this notion of interdependence, that our societies today are interdependent, but are interdependent in a very specific way that is somehow unprecedented. And it's related to process of dangerous planetary change, for which sometimes we use the word the Anthropocene to signify that. But I think what we went through in 2020, 2021 can be seen as a health problem, or can be seen as the inability of the international community, our countries, our societies, to manage a shared problem in which countries are interdependent, which is the control of a new agent, infectious agent, that requires collaboration, cooperation between countries. Even if countries were doing everything they should be doing nationally, implementing all the right policies, doing all the right investments, they would have still be vulnerable to this inability of all of us together to manage this shared challenge. So I want to leave you with this idea, and I'll come back with this idea of interdependence and the inability of us, all of us, to manage interdependence. I'll come back to it at the end of the presentation. But we go further and ask, why are we falling short in managing interdependence? Again, there are many reasons, but one that we emphasize is the fact that many societies, many countries around the world are polarized. Societies are polarized. What does polarization mean? We'll hear perhaps more about it from an expert, Robert, in the panel later today. But in essence, it's very different from people within societies having difference of opinions or different views about priority policies. That's good. We should have those differences. We should have those debates. That's how societies thrive. That's how innovation occurs. People proposing something new that's different from what others think. But polarization is something very different. Polarization is something that pulls parts of the society apart from each other around issues such as whether we're doing too much or not enough on climate change, the way in which we should handle a health crisis, and the list goes on and on and on. And so polarization is problematic because it paralyzes societies when it comes to addressing shared challenges, and it also paralyzes the international community when it comes to our ability to manage these interdependencies. And one of the manifestations of this polarization is something that we found quite striking, and that we call the democracy paradox. So what we see on this chart, on the horizontal axis, is the share of the global population that believes in democracy as the best possible political system. And the dots represent the way in which people respond to this question, and on the vertical axis you see the percentage of the global population that supports leaders that may undermine democracy. So what does this chart shows is that the line, or sort of the dots, move vertically, meaning that people's belief in democracy holds steady at over 90%. People like democracy, people want democracy. But at the same time, they have been, since the turn of the century, more and more inclined to support leaders that may undermine democracy. 2/3 of the global population today does not feel that their voice is heard in their political systems. 2/3 of the global population. You also see on the slide that in 2/3 of countries around the world, since 2011, there's been an increase in this political polarization that I described. And there's been a steady erosion of democratic norms and practices to an extent to which they are now at levels that we saw in the mid-1980s. What does this mean? Well, one of the implications is that, or one of the manifestations of this polarization, there has been a steady support to political views that are at the extremes of the political spectrum. And we'll go a little bit later as to the reasons why. So what you see on this chart is the share of governments that can be classified in some way as populist, in the sense that they have discourses of platforms that are anti-elite, anti-science, to Christian's point, and anti-engaging with the world. And you see it's been volatile over time. There was sort of a peak in the 1920s and 30s, as we are all aware of, but this is now reaching the highest level on record, at least the highest level since the beginning of the 20th century. About a quarter of governments today can be classified in some sense as being populist according to this definition: anti-elite, anti-science, anti-experts, and being inward-looking. So going against this notion of engaging with the rest of the world, which is problematic if you follow my argument that it's important to share, to manage these shared challenges. And this is a bit puzzling because it's something that is costly. What you see on the right-hand side is the economic cost of this kind of regimes that, compared to a counterfactual of governments that do not follow these policies or these positions, they do much better economically. But the costs are not only economic. The costs are perhaps even more dramatically felt in things like forced displacement or people dying in wars, which you see on this slide, both of which have been increasing and are now reaching levels comparable to those that we found in the aftermath of World War II. So sorry, this paints a pretty bleak picture, but the report is not only about bad news, the report is also about suggesting ways forward, about things that we can do. What I've described in some sense is a gridlock, is a situation of gridlock in which it's becoming more difficult to address shared challenges both within and across countries. And the report suggests that we can reimagine cooperation to address this challenge in at least 3 ways. First, as Elena emphasized, to put much more emphasis on the importance of agency. The focus of policies typically is on well-being, on whether people have standards of living, health and education, and that's very important, and that's what we measured with our Human Development Index. But this notion of agency, of whether people feel in control of their lives, is also something that is very important and should be, we argue, an objective focus of policy. So what you see on this slide is that as people feel more insecure, feel less safe, they also report feeling that they are less in control of their lives. So there's a correlation between perceptions of insecurity and people feeling that they don't have agency to control their lives. And Karen has already alluded to this. This was actually something that we highlighted in our latest Human Development Report. People that feel more insecure also tend to trust others less. And people that feel more insecure tend to be attracted to the extremes of the political spectrum. So there's also association between perceptions of insecurity, not only with lack of agency, but also with lack of trust, and something that drives political polarization, pulls people apart. So I think these findings point us to a direction of elements, pointers, for policy, for interventions that can help us to ease polarization. Secondly, we actually, even though we there's a lot of evidence that people are polarized in many societies, we actually often agree on more than we think we do. So what you see on this slide is the results of a survey, globally representative, that asked people whether they would be willing to make a personal financial sacrifice to mitigate climate change. Not if they believe in climate change, whether they would be willing to lose something, some money, to mitigate climate change. 90% of the population, almost 70% of the global population reports that yes, they would be willing to make a personal financial sacrifice to mitigate climate change. It's not 100%, but 70% is pretty good. However, when they are asked if they believe that people around them share the same conviction, the percentage drops to a little over 40%. What does this mean? This means that people do not believe that there is enough in the collective, in society, to mitigate climate change. And climate change is an example of a problem that no matter how much each of us individually is committed to address, we know that we can only address it together. It's a collective action problem. So this gap between the personal conviction and what people think society means represents, or believes in, represents what sometimes is called a situation of pluralistic ignorance. So if we pierce through this fog of misperceptions, that would be a way to enable people to recognize that they actually agree on more than they think. I gave the example of climate change, but this is something that extends to many other polarizing issues, like migration, for instance, attitudes towards migration, or gender. And in the report, we have many examples, and perhaps we can discuss them during our conversation as well. But the idea here is that there is a gap between what people individually are committed to do, or what they believe about an issue, and what they think others around them believe around the same issue. So piercing through this fog of misperception could be a way of enabling us to come together. And then finally, and I'll conclude, we move now from the domestic to the international. So remember, I alluded at the beginning that we can look at what happened in 2020, 2021 as a challenge of the consequences of our inability to manage an interdependent challenge. So that was taking a look in the rear view mirror, looking backwards. What you see on this slide is what's likely to happen looking ahead, looking forward, under a scenario in which we fail to take decisive action on climate change. And what you see on this slide is the change in mortality rates for countries at different levels of the Human Development Index. So what you can see is that the lower the level of the Human Development Index, the higher this increase in death rates is going to be from now until the end of the century. In other words, if we don't address climate change, we will see an explosion of inequalities in human development. So this is now not looking backwards, but looking forward. So this goes back to this notion of interdependence. The world today is interdependent in a very different way from the interdependence that was dominating debates 20 years ago around globalization. You know, trade flows, too open, not open enough, capital flows, movement of people. The fact that we are living in a planet that is changing rapidly compels us to address these interdependent challenges. And our contention is that it's possible to do this even if countries don't agree on many things. Countries will not agree on many things. They have different interests. They will compete with each other. But that is not incompatible with the countries finding arenas of cooperation in which managing this interdependence is not a zero-sum proposition. It's actually in the interest of all of them. And this has happened in the past, if you are skeptical. You know, smallpox was eradicated in the midst of the Cold War. We came together when it came to the Montreal Protocol that will eventually enable us to restore the ozone layer in a few decades, hopefully. So it's possible. It's possible to find ways for countries to come together even when they have very divergent interests. The angle that we suggest in the report to enable us to do this is a particular perspective that puts an emphasis on the provision of global public goods, which are things like climate change mitigation, in which one country benefiting does not have to be at the expense of others. So with that, let me stop. Maybe I took longer than I expected, but now we go to the flash talks, I think, Elena. Finally.
Thank you so much, Pedro, and please don't leave the stage too early.
Now, that was off
since
the
you
hook.
are here. Yeah, thank you so much, and accept my apologies for mixing the two parts of the event. We have a few minutes for questions from the audience, reactions or feedbacks, if anyone wants to ask something or add or comment. Oh, Christian, please. Ah, yeah.
Thank you. Pedro, I have a question that goes to what often is called the elephant in the room. When you look at this growing gap again in the Human Development Index between the developed and the lesser developed world and countries, what do you think, to what extent is the still increasing human population responsible for some of that? Because, I mean, we always say there is climate change and there's this and this and this, but what's behind all that, behind all the overuse of the world, is the ever-increasing number of our species, which causes a lot of problems. And people usually don't like to talk about that very much, and I'd like to hear your opinion.
Thank you, Christian. Well, Wolfgang is here, so I'll speak under his control. He's the expert on these things. But I think you're right from a purely mechanistic sense, right? More people consume more resources, put more pressure.
Excuse me, one addition.
Sure.
The poor people are getting more and more, right?
Exactly.
So
exactly. And with aspirations also to move up on the standards of living. But what I think we need to bear in mind, and obviously we all know this, is that in many countries what we're seeing actually is a sharp decline in fertility rates. You know, countries like the Republic of Korea, the fertility rate is now something like 0.6. When the replacement fertility rate that would stabilize the population is something around 2.1, right? Wolfgang, is this correct? So this is also happening in many parts of Europe. In fact, a recent survey that the OECD is going to launch in a few weeks to businesses in Italy, asking them what do they find as the main problem. What is the main problem that businesses in Italy find today? They report labor. They don't find people to work. So the solution here is, it's almost self-evident. We would have to find ways in which countries in which have very rapidly growing populations, we are able to give them the conditions so that they can be productive and integrated in societies that are missing people. And many countries are already trying to do that. I mentioned the Republic of Korea. Japan is also trying to do that. But then the challenge comes back to polarization in a sense, right? Because migration is one of the most polarizing issues in many parts of the world. So in fact, the report, going back to this example of misperceptions that I alluded to, if people are asked to estimate what is the share of the foreign population that lives in each country, they overestimate the real number by almost 10 percentage points across most countries, most high-income countries at least. And something very interesting, this overestimation, and you rarely see something like this in the social sciences, doesn't depend on gender, doesn't depend on income, doesn't depend on educational level, doesn't depend on whether your parents were born outside of the country in which you live or not. It's something very, very robust. So it's something very fundamental that we have to confront. It's this misperception between the reality of what migration represents and what people perceive migration as a problem in many countries. So again, piercing through this misperception would be another way potentially that would enable us to lower the polarization. That could be a way of solving the population problem that you alluded to. To summarize, perhaps the way of looking at population is no longer perhaps the concern that we had in the 70s or 80s, in which population was growing very rapidly, almost everywhere, but more a way of, in a context in which population is likely to stabilize towards the end of the century, how do we manage the fact that many countries need people, don't have enough people, and other countries are still growing very rapidly? Wolfgang, I don't know if this was okay, if I passed the exam.
Maybe just to add. Thank you very much for bringing in the migration topic. Just more directly to the poorest African countries. There indeed, in most countries, we also see rapidly declining birth rates. There are just a few countries in Central and Western Africa, and this is directly associated with lack of progress in female education. And this is sort of, it's not the population growth that causes poverty, but it is sort of lack of education, particularly of young women, that causes both higher birth rates and population growth and poverty, and of course lack in progress in human capital formation. So this leads me to my question of this stagnation of the Human Development Report, or this falling below the trend line. Which of the three components has been most important? Was it the life expectancy, the education, or the income component?
Just going back to the point that Wolfgang made on where we have very rapid population growth still, to your point as well, Christian, it's in places like the Sahel, where fertility rates are 7, 8. Why is this important? Because these are also regions in which ecosystems are already stressing to enable populations to thrive there. So I don't think it's a surprise that these are also regions in which we see so much political tension, geopolitical tension, and military confrontation as well, or violent confrontation as well. As to your question, Wolfgang, so this was a very unusual, unprecedented really, set of factors that drove the decline in Human Development Index. We've had economic crises in the past. We had the global recession in 2009, 2010. But that was an economic crisis. You know, life expectancy continued to improve. Education continued to improve. Life expectancy at birth improves around 0.3 on average over time. So that continued to improve. So what happened in 2020, 2021 was that the three components of the Human Development Index were affected at the same time, and were affected everywhere at the same time. So we had, as you remember, lockdowns in many countries. So the economy was sort of frozen. So there were very sharp recessions, economic recessions, that affected the economic component of the Human Development Index. Life expectancy at birth declined in many places by something like 2 years. And this is something unprecedented, certainly in the period that we have been monitoring at the scale in which it happened. And then education was also affected. Our indicators don't pick it up very well because we rely on enrollment rates, which were formally not affected, but we know that many children were not able to go to school. And the quality of the education that they received in many parts of the world was not adequate, especially if they didn't have ability to connect to the internet. So the three components were affected, Wolfgang, and they were affected. They affected all the countries in the world, and they affected them at the same time. So it was this combination of the three components, all the countries, and at the same time, that led to this decline in the Global Human Development Index.
We have time for one comment, perhaps.
Just a terminology clarification. Could you please quote 3 examples for global public goods, or do they equal with SDGs? So I was a bit confused, and related, I believe the success story of the Asian countries in the last 50 years was due to private goods and private markets, and not due to public goods. Or I'm just confused a bit about terminology.
That's a very good question. I think sometimes we just take for granted the many global public goods that we rely on. For instance, the ability to travel by airplane, the regulations, the rules that enable us to travel, that enables the rules of trade that enable those countries that you mentioned to export to the global market, telecommunications, our ability to place a phone call to any part of the world. So there are many things actually that it's like the air we breathe. We just take it for granted. But there are many of these kind of problems that have been solved, that have been addressed. So the question is, why are we so successful in solving so many of these problems, and we are falling short in others? So the report has some ideas that as to what can be done. You know, essentially the intuition is that countries, because they are sovereign, they always have the option of withdrawing from a treaty. Even if you have a perfect international treaty with full enforcement, a country, because it's sovereign, can always withdraw. So the trick is to find mechanisms in which it's in the interest of every country to be part of the agreement. So no country has an incentive or an interest in setting up its own standard for telecommunications, because that would mean that it's outside of the network, right? No country has an incentive to create containers that are different from the 2 standard measures that are used for merchandise trade all over the world, because they wouldn't fit necessarily into the boats. So there are mechanisms we have to find, be creative. This is for Ambassador Huber, maybe for diplomats, to be creative and find incentives in which countries can come together to provide these global public goods that provide the infrastructure in which private enterprise, commerce, entrepreneurs can then thrive. I think there was one question here. We should...
more a comment.
Or a comment.
I do find it quite interesting to talk about kind of like, thank you, about kind of like the responsibility of the individual and the responsibility of countries. But what I was kind of like also quite shocked not to hear about is the fact that 57 companies are responsible for 80% of greenhouse emissions. Plus the wealth gap, plus after the Paris Agreement, they actually scaled up production. So what are kind of like the thoughts to addressing that? Because individual action, of course, really important, but the real issues are the big companies who are essentially holding us hostage and making us reliable on them. So all of the other problems are also connected to that at the end of the day.
I agree, actually, because we have plenty of evidence that companies that are interested in the status quo, actually, sometimes it's not that they negate science, they are more sophisticated than that, but they leverage uncertainty, or what's sometimes perceived as uncertainty in science, to create doubts in the public and in public policy. So we've seen that in the tobacco industry, for instance, for many years, and we're seeing now this by many fossil fuel companies. There's Someone called Naomi Oreskes that wrote a fascinating account of all these cases, both in the case of the tobacco industry and climate change. And the title of her book is Merchants of Doubt. So they are not denying the science, but they are instilling uncertainty and doubt in the public and in the policymakers. So certainly that is a problem. But complementing this problem that you alluded to, what our analysis tries to point towards is the kind of broader behavioral changes that all of us need to consider making. And again, the point is that each of us individually may not be powerful enough to make an impact, but collectively we will be. So piercing through this fog of misperception could be a way to enable us to make progress towards that behavioral change that is needed.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, we have to now proceed to flash talks, as you now know. But there will be time afterwards. Finally. Thank you so much, Pedro. But there will be time afterwards also for interaction. So those who didn't have a chance to make a comment or ask the question, there will be time after we finish the event and you can interact with Pedro and with others. And now we proceed to flash talks. And Monica, apologies also from my side that I introduced you prematurely, but now please come to the stage, CEO Ban Ki-moon. Center for Global Citizens, for those who don't know, this is an organization that aims to foster leadership for implementation of the SDGs and the Paris Agreement by inspiring current leaders as decision makers and empowering the next generation of leaders as change makers.
Thank you so much, Elena. And thank you, Your Excellencies, previous speakers, and of course, Pedro, for your amazing keynote summarizing the Human Development Report. Ladies and gentlemen, we are in a moment, this time, where the world is disrupted. We see a world full of conflict. We see a world that is exposed to fiscal stress. We see great dangers to the social cohesion everywhere. And we see inequalities rising. All of us, I think, have a sense that injustice is there, and there is a general sense of even insecurity. And I dare say this insecurity is at individual level, at national level, but even at global level. And populism, we all know, fans the fears of people all across the globe. And when you go out on the street and talk to people, you will hear that they mistrust politics, they mistrust institutions, and they don't believe in multilateralism anymore. I was taken when Pedro illustrated in his keynote that the Human Development Report illustrates that actually many of us want to see democracy thrive, and we believe in the principle of democracy. But it is a fact that more than 50% of the global population actually is currently supporting leaders that bypass national laws or parliamentary elections. So our social fabric undeniably is under stress. Pedro also illustrated that out of 10 people, 5 will tell you worldwide that they actually don't feel in control of their lives. Out of 10 people, 7 will tell you that they don't feel that their voice is represented in politics. Now, at the Ban Ki-moon Center, we work with exactly those people, because we work with the young ones that want to change the world. And they intuitively know that we are interdependent. They intuitively know that we have amazing opportunities, digital opportunities, by being connected. And they intuitively know that we need to tackle the problems of this day and age with cooperation, not with conflict. Because global challenges, as we heard before, like the pandemics and like climate change, all of us know we can't solve them on our own. We need an assembly. We need more to come to do it together. So the Human Development Report is talking about agency. So let's look at ourselves. How are we, me and you, closing the agency gaps? I think our main goal for all of us should be to enable people, to empower them to be less threatened by everything that is happening. Does that sound naive? Maybe it does. But let me tell you the story of a naive young man sent from South Korea at the age of 19 to the US, a man by the name of Ban Ki-moon. He was sent there by the Red Cross on an exchange program, and he found himself on the lawn of the White House hearing from John F. Kennedy himself. And John F. Kennedy actually told the youngsters gathered from all over the globe to lend a hand, to stretch out a hand in service to others. And young Ban Ki-moon was so impressed by that he said, how can I serve my nation best? I probably should join the Foreign Service. And ladies and gentlemen, the rest is history. He did join the Foreign Service, like Peter Huber joined his Foreign Service of Austria. And he became Minister of Foreign Affairs, and he became Secretary General of the United Nations. And we are thankful that under his tenure, the world came together on the SDGs and the Paris Climate Agreement. Was he naive? At the age of 19, on the lawn with John F. Kennedy? Probably he was. But he knew that if he is stretching out his hand in help, he knew about the interdependence, and he knew about the global citizen mindset that he wanted to instill in the world. Or let me tell you another story of Lilian Nakigozi. Lilian is one of our Ban Ki-moon Center champions, and she's active in Uganda, Kampala. She saw that ladies had little means to feed their own families, let alone be economically well off. So she founded a little garden patch, a design garden, to teach ladies to vertically farm there. And she was particularly focusing on slum dwellers in Kampala. Her NGO is called Women Smiles Uganda, and she is managing to support hundreds of women in the meantime. Was she naive starting this? Maybe she was, but she realized that being of service to herself economically, she can actually also be of service to others economically. And the third story that I have for you is the story of Kat in Cambodia. She's a Ban Ki-moon Center fellow who is a journalist and didn't get any employment with any of the newspapers in Cambodia. And she was struggling because her feminist topics weren't covered in Cambodia at all. So she said, I need to do something about this. And she founded her own newspaper online at very little cost. And in the meantime, she has 90,000 followers talking about feminist subjects, about sex positivity and taboo topics like menstruation. She has a followership. Was she naive? Maybe, but she showed agency to put some wrong right in her society. So indeed, ladies and gentlemen, I will close by saying we have some fundamental realities that we will have to tackle. One is technological progress will always have winners and losers. Yes. And if we simply leave those that are losing behind, we will all lose. A second reality is that crises will definitely be there. They will reoccur, and they probably even grow in intensity if we don't adapt ourselves and tackle the root causes. And third, yes, we are living in an interdependent world with lots of complexities, but we are economically, ecologically, and even bound by a common destiny as humankind. So in the spirit of Ban Ki-moon and in the spirit of Lilian in Uganda and Kat in Cambodia, I herewith vouch in front of all of you that I will try to use my lifetime to actually give others agency. Is that naive? Maybe, but I hope you do the same. Thank you.
You see now why I was looking forward to the flash talks. This is very inspiring. Thank you so much, Monica. Thank you. And thank you for bringing these personal or individual examples. That really makes it real, yeah, this discussion. Thank you so much. Now let me invite to the stage Gloria Benedict, research artist and stage director, who some years back led at IIASA a very pioneering project on science and arts, and she will share with us her experiences from that project and more recently.
Thank you, Elena. Good morning. The link between knowledge and action is missing. That's what Brian Fath said in Courage, the first stage work I co-created with IIASA scientists in 2016. And besides this knowledge to action gap, we also face an agency gap, as we have already heard today. And then there's one more gap that is rarely discussed in the science policy discourse, the culture gap. But before you despair, because 2 gaps are already enough to handle, I have some good news. Culture could also be the bridge between these 2 gaps. Changes in knowledge are rarely matched by corresponding changes in behavior. My colleague David Max recently wrote. In other words, the hope that if we knew better, we would do better remains unfulfilled. Modern society has been heavily focused on knowledge creation, not on the reflection of values. Thus, the agency gap shouldn't come as a surprise. Besides spaces to create better understanding, for which we have buildings like this one and institutions like IIASA, we would also need spaces to address questions of being. So we can, for instance, determine what it means to live a good life in a post-fossil fuel world, or what our responsibility toward future generations actually is. So, what tools do we have to address deep value questions? And in which spaces could we reflect on them? We have a large body of literature that shows how stories have mobilized individuals and groups into action across human history and contributed to reshaping the world. For example, Martin Puchner, professor of Harvard University, with whom I started the Stories for the Future project in 2019, shows how humans have told stories to make sense of the world and our places in it for millennia. They connect us to the past, the stories, to great causes beyond ourselves, and offer glimpses of the future. Now, storytelling has become a bit of a buzzword recently. I have the impression every second person on my LinkedIn account is a storyteller now. But when we say story, I really mean story, not narrative as a marketing tool. We mean plot with protagonists and real characters. The stories told in novels, on theater stages, and in feature films shape our worldviews and consequently our actions. Art can thus help maintain the status quo or contribute to addressing ecological and related social and geopolitical problems. But when we look at the programs of established arts institutions today, we would hardly notice that we are facing an existential crisis. The same old stories keep being told there. Yet it is within these public spaces we could generate what the German sociologist and political scientist Hartmut Rosser calls a Resonanzerfahrung, a deep, meaningful connection between individuals and the world around them. His American colleague Jonathan Haidt refers to the same phenomenon as awe. It acts like a reset button, he writes. It makes people forget themselves and their petty concerns and creates openness to new possibilities, values, and directions in life. So you may wonder how people react to such experiences. So here are some of the kinds of responses that I have experienced in the past years. So sometimes people cry, or they say things like, the whole world needs to see this, or I feel like I was in an emotional washing machine. I walked out of this space with a different perspective about what matters to me and what I can do. So, if we are to improve human agency and overcome the knowledge to action gap and shift toward a regenerative existence, we would need more of these perspective-changing experiences. Now, to conclude, I will still answer one question you may all have now, which is, what do these experiences that address these deep value questions actually look like? So imagine, for example, we would not only speak of future generations, Imagine we could speak to the future generation and even meet the future generation. As announced by IIASA yesterday, this is about to happen. On October 14th, the future generation will visit from the year 2075. A scientist, a philosopher, a diplomat, and an activist are sent to a mission to Vienna, to find out what people around the year 2025 knew, did, feared, hoped for, and dreamt of. And as events unfold on stage, the audience will be asked to reflect on questions that encourage human agency, to determine for themselves what it means to live a good life, what to get rid of, what really matters, and what a regenerative life would look like. Yeah, I think I will finish here. If you're not yet very interested what will happen 14th of October, I will give away one more detail. John Schellenhuber will also have a discussion with the future generation, but I will not give away yet what they will be discussing. So this was my flash, and I will be around to talk further if you have any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Gloria. And now let me invite Pratik Patil, a researcher from IIASA, and he will share with us some of our research on agency that we do in collaboration with Human Development Report Office.
Thank you, Elena. I hope this works. Oh yeah, perfect. Maybe I need to go a step back. All right. Thank you. I would like to start by acknowledging that indeed we had an opportunity to advance the concept of sustainable agency thanks to a project commissioned by HDRO. Agency is defined as an ability to hold values, make commitments and choices that may or may not advance a person's well-being. Until now, a focus of development efforts has been on capabilities and material well-being achievements, such as the standard of living. HDI, for example, explicitly measures capabilities. There is a need to bridge this gap for two reasons. Individually, a sense of personal agency has been identified as a key marker of healthy psychology, and collectively, agency is necessary to navigate the challenges of the 21st century. We started our investigation with an ontology of agency. Any expression of agency is not an isolated instance, an exercise of pure free will. We find that agency is a temporal process. That is, it is informed by the past. This is the habitual element, but oriented toward the present and also the future with a projective element to imagine alternative possibilities. It includes choosing a reason for making choices. Agency cannot be reduced to just imposing our will onto the world, but involves questioning the basis of our choices. We focused on these concepts for agency in the context of, I would say, great acceleration rather than the Anthropocene, maybe. Affordances refer to what environment offers to an agent. They can be considered a material basis for agency, that is resources, resilient earth systems, technology, etc. Sustainability, of course, implies taking into consideration other people's needs in the exercise of agency. And we live in the context where technological evolution has reached a stage where progress is increasingly being defined by what we say no to rather than what we say yes to. Diving deeper, we formulated a typology to discern different dimensions of agency. That is, primary agency to fulfill essential needs for survival. This is satiable. Economic agency, agency to fulfill material wants. Socio-political agency to affect social political circumstances if desired. And sustainable agency, agency to influence intentionally and positively well-being of others beyond self-centric wants. We further developed this dynamic between different types of agency. So we have primary agency, fulfillment of basic needs, which is followed by further insatiable wants, economic agency. And both of these have a material basis, that is affordances, resources, stable earth systems, etc. Economic agency interacts with socio-political agency, which may evolve into sustainable agency, that is agency to include other people's and future generations' well-being. As we have already exceeded multiple planetary boundaries, we need to enhance our sustainable agency that can exercise appropriate constraints on economic agency, because unconstrained economic agency translates into malfunctional agency. To conclude, I would like to leave you with the thought that the enhancement of human agency as an essential component of human development is an end in itself, but also means to navigate the challenges of the 21st century. Thank you.
Thank you, Pat, and thank you all three speakers in this part of our event for giving us this food for thought from, as I was saying before, from very diverse perspectives. So now we can proceed further, and now we can, let me invite to the stage the panelists of our panel discussion. Let me invite Robert Böhm, and Professor at the University of Vienna, who specializes in social psychology, in the context of work, society, and economy, affiliated with the Faculty of Psychology, if that's correct. Lukas Wang, Director Global Responsibility. This is the Austrian platform with 33 member organizations working in development cooperation, humanitarian aid, development, education, and policy work. Would you please come to the stage? Caroline Sim, Research Scholar at IIASA. She currently works on the international research initiatives of the Earth Commission of the Global Commons Alliance and leads the IIASA strategic initiative that is called Just Transition to Net Zero Carbon Emissions for All. And regrettably, Professor Nina Klimburg-Witjes from the University of Vienna couldn't be with us here today because of the events that were happening in the last days. Welcome to all three speakers. And let me start this panel by reminding ourselves the quote that many of you, I'm sure, know, that is from Edward Wilson, that remarked that humanity is characterized by Paleolithic emotions, medieval institutions, and godlike technology. So this quote, I believe, really summarizes the challenges that we heard about in Pedro's presentation and that we all face today. So this disconnect between the three elements is really the root cause of many problems. So in this session, in this discussion panel, we will address some of the dimensions of that. And let me go directly to my questions that I have here. And again, I encourage the audience also to think of your questions. I hope the time allows to some of them. And also the virtual audience, the online audience, please post your comments and questions in the chat. I can read, again, some of them, perhaps not all. Let's see how the time allows. But let me start by my questions first, and quoting the Human Development Report that says that the formation of social norms that cultivate the value of collective achievements and cooperative behavior is a key means to enhance our agency. So Robert, from your research on fostering pro-social norms, how do you think we can foster collective agency at the global level, where it seems to be missing the most, as again the presentation highlighted? Are pro-social norms sufficient to drive change, or are there any alternatives to that?
Okay, these are a lot of questions, but I try to take them step by step, okay? First of all, thank you all for being here, and thanks for having me for this panel discussion. So, yes, in general, there's plenty of evidence. Social norms are a strong driver of human behavior and also of behavior change. The problem is, particularly with the problems we're talking about here in today's discussion, these require universal cooperation on a global level. And this is typically not how our norms evolve and the norms we adhere to. So typically norms are on a much smaller scale, Yeah? The largest where we know that they work is maybe on a national level. And also in terms of interdependence, we typically perceive positive interdependence on much smaller levels, such within countries. I mean, we all share the experience of a flooding in Austria, so we have a positive interdependence in this experience, but on a global level, we may actually perceive negative interdependence. So I now come to one answer at least. So I think we need to use the power of more group-bounded norms, because this is the first step. It's much, much harder to address strong universal norms. So I think like taking away and working against this wrong perception that there is a negative interdependence, for instance, between countries, and first focusing on how can we jointly in Austria, let's say, what can we do actually to make change in Austria? And then we need to change the narrative that this may be in terms of a free riding problem, that this will not make a change. Of course it will not make a change, even if Austria is CO2 neutral, emission neutral, right? But it's important to change the narrative that someone needs to go first, and we can show that we can do that. And we can establish such norms, I'm very sure. So that is one answer, and maybe the rest we can discuss later in 3 or 4 hours. Yeah.
Just a direct follow-up on this, would be a specific example how you can imagine that happening in Austria, for instance?
Yeah, I mean, as I said, norms are often driven by joint experiences. And we need to deliver such experiences. And you mentioned it, yeah? There are different ways of doing that. Some are more to the art side, some are more to the scientific science, and some try to combine it, as I understand you do as well. And we do the same. So we try to create future scenarios in virtual reality that give people joint experiences of the future, for instance. And this experience-based learning is much stronger than knowledge-based learning, and that may establish actually norms. And using such tools, for instance, can be used in schools. Yeah? So early in the human development, now with a different focus, human development, yeah, we need to establish such norms, such that we can actually enhance behavior change that is needed on a much smaller level than the global level.
Very interesting, thank you very much. My next question goes to Caroline, my colleague at IIASA. And your research on tipping points, social and biophysical tipping points, reveals that, or what does it reveal about the connection between human agency and sustainable development? How this thinking through tipping points, is it helpful? Does it uncover some of the phenomena perhaps related to the interconnectedness? Could you share your insights about that?
Yeah, thank you also from my side for inviting me.
Could you move the microphone closer?
Okay, better? Okay, super. Yeah, so we relaunched a Global Tipping Points report last year where we combined a perspective on Earth system tipping points that is very negative. And I think this also comes to the discussion we might have later on positive narratives, with outlook on positive social tipping points, so tipping points in socioeconomic systems that lead to positive, in a normative sense, change that is closer to sustainable development, and you can still have an argument of what positive means for everyone, because depending on the actors, some might not see that decarbonization is all that positive, right? So this is also a terminology question, and I really like the contribution by Pat on the terminology. And with regards to the social components within the positive tipping points, we see that there's a lot of focus on individual behavior change, where individuals are often seen as consumers and that's it. And a lot of the other potential activities that they could do in terms of, okay, voting or investment or being actors of change, as we heard from the examples of also talking and knowledge sharing, is underrepresented in a lot of research that speaks to tipping points. We also see that taking these examples from the environmental and physical tipping points is not always useful for social social systems, because a big thing within the tipping points community is the question of irreversibility. And when you look at social systems, the question of irreversibility, depending on the time scale that you look at, is questionable. So any change could also be changed quite quickly. So they could reverse. I mean, this is something that we actually saw in Pedro's slides. We were on a certain track, but now the direction of change is reverting. What we, especially in this report, also tried to show is that, I mean, we need any kind of accelerated change if we still want to keep the Paris Agreement alive or achieve other sustainable development goals. So irrespective of negative tipping points, we do actually need those positive social tipping points across all social cultural systems. But the individuum is not strong enough in that sense that we need systematic change. And what you mentioned also with these, that norm change, culture change, that is then pervasive through all the structures and infrastructures that we have, and does not go only to the individual in terms of the decision making for the individual. Because it's nice if I change from one technology and the norm changes, then everybody has now electric vehicles. That might on the first look be a great change. But the even more transformational change could be that we have different transport systems, so that we don't only replace one technology with the other, even though it could be a big norm change already that we move from fossil to electric vehicles. So and I leave it at that, and thanks for the experimental learning. I really like that.
Yeah, thank you, Caroline. Lucas, you work with people who have the low agency, as also Pedro was telling us. So they, due to their circumstances, of course, how do you think they could still enhance their agency? Or should, let's say, REACH come and somehow do that? Like where the change should come from in that sense?
Yeah, thank you very much, and also thanks for the opportunity to speak out of a more practitioner's perspective. We've heard a lot from research and from the scientific community today, and I would say my role as representing 36 organizations that work in development aid, humanitarian aid, development policy work, and development education is really more a practitioner's perspective. And those 36 organizations are constantly implementing something over 1,000 or 1,100 projects around the world in approximately 120 countries worldwide. And I would say by doing so, the NGOs I represent, like many others, are already working with and for the vulnerable populations and marginalized groups. And to go back to your question, is the exercise of a more rigid or more sustainable agency possible without much sacrifice from richer countries? And I would say yes, because I see it every day. It is essentially very well pointed out in this year's Human Development Report in the first place. Because if we work towards narrowing the agency gap, it means working towards focusing more on narrowing this agency gap by ensuring financial support for human and sustainable development, or adequate support at least. This is also something we do not see very often. It's about empowering vulnerable people, and it's about providing access to health or education, for example. So it's actually not that hard to create more agency. And then also something that the report pointed out is that by actually supporting marginalized groups, this creates a position for them that gives them more political, ecological, and also economical agency. And then I would say by capitalizing on what's out there and using the instruments that are out there better and more qualitatively, for example, I think creating more agency for vulnerable populations is very much possible. And in the end, it's a discussion about improving the instruments that are out there. It's about improving development policies that are already existing. It's about creating a situation, a systemic situation where adequate funding is not in question and not politicized in a way. And it's then also a discussion, and I very much like to see it through that lens. It's a discussion about, in the end, development and creating agency is a discussion about human rights. It's about upholding human rights, and it's a discussion about properly committing to the humanitarian imperative. By doing so, development becomes more than just aid and cannot be seen as a privilege anymore. And then it's not a question about sacrifice, but it's a question about ensuring that vulnerable groups have fundamental rights, and that local populations can actually claim those rights. Yeah. And that's very much the discourse that our platform and our member organizations would like to see out there. And I would say, and this was pointed out, I think, by the presentation of the Human Development Report, or by Monica in her beautiful speech, or in both instances, creating agency through a human rights lens is very much about providing or ensuring dignity for populations and marginalized groups, and then it's about then it's more about enabling people, and not so much about sacrificing wealth from richer nations in the end. Yeah. And I want to close by saying that, or by pointing out two really key areas of action, which I think are really essential, and I mentioned them all already anyway. I think one is to support local civil societies and civil society organizations worldwide who tirelessly work towards narrowing this agency gap already. And the second point is, and it doesn't go without it, is providing sustainable and adequate funding, long-term funding, that is protected or not out in the tide of political considerations, I would say, in the end. So I would close I would close at this point. Thank you.
Thank you for highlighting this important practical enablers. Of course, the funding is always the question, yeah, for things like that. I want to come back to the numbers that Pedro presented in his presentation, highlighting that many people, over half of the, over 50% of the population, do not feel themselves in control of their own lives. Yeah, so this sends really a very strong message. These numbers. And it's actually easy to understand why they don't feel that way. Yeah? So when something like pandemic comes, when something like events over the last several days in Austria come, it's very easy to feel not actually in control of our own lives. Yeah? So do you think these statistics represent a realistic perception and we should change that? Or it's about misperception and we can empower people by promoting this more active role that they may play. So how do you perceive these numbers actually? Robert, perhaps you could start.
Okay. Yeah, so no question. So control, or the perception of having control or agency, is a very, I mean, it's a fundamental human need. And if people lack that, we have a problem. Yeah. The question is, I think what these numbers refer to is like self-efficacy. So the perception of personally making a change. And I think one role that we as scientists, as communicators have, is that these big problems we are facing, actually self-efficacy is not the most important part. It's actually collective efficacy. Yeah? So we need to provide people the perception, the feeling that they can actually contribute to these fundamental societal challenges. And I think this is a very important thing, and particularly in democratic societies, I mean, we can say, look, you can actually contribute by shaping how we will develop and how we will achieve that. So I think we need to reframe, and I don't like that, that sounds so psychology well, maybe because I'm a psychologist. So we need to reframe that it's actually more important or very important as well to collectively achieve something. And we have a lot of opportunities of doing that to solve those challenges. And there's quite some research, for instance, about institutions. We have very bad reputation of strong institutions. Yeah? Think about just even if I say the word mandate, yeah, or taxes. These have a very bad reputation. And I think we need, I mean, there is Nobel Prize winning work in economics and other fields, political science, about institutions. And we only, as social scientists, we started much too late to understand how can we actually provide more support, that people will support such strong institutions that will help us to achieve those goals. And this is a matter of collective efficacy, yeah, to support the right policies.
And is there any contradiction between individual agency and collective agency? Do we have to give up some of the individual agency towards the collective, or you think this can be resolved without the conflict?
Well, in a social dilemma, there is a natural conflict between it, a tension. Yeah? If people perceive a tension between individual interests and collective interests, there we have a problem, right? But there is quite a lot of research that you can transform this cooperation problem, as Pedro also mentioned, to a coordination problem. So the idea that actually we need to coordinate on joint actions that will all make all our lives better off. Yeah? And that is actually a matter of, this is reality, and you have mentioned it, there are many cases where we succeeded in that. So yes, I think it is a real tension in many people's heads and their perceptions, and it's our task to reshape this to provide positive interdependence.
Caroline, would you like to address this topic?
I think I leave it to the psychologists. I think this is more better from...
Or Lucas?
Yeah, I would like to add something, and touching upon something that you mentioned. I think it's very much about creating a narrative of mutual benefits. And you were talking about the taxes, for example. And I agree, there's a very bad narrative about taxes out there. But if you, I mean, looking at it from another side, you could say, well, everyone pays taxes, and then with those taxes, a Viennese hospital can buy an X-ray machine, which could actually save your life or the lives of your children, and so on and so forth, yeah, and helps us all to be able to live our lives in dignity. So that would be a completely different narrative about taxes, for example. This is completely lacking in our societies, and I don't think our politicians get that right from any point of view. And this also pertains very much to the field where I work in, development policy and humanitarian aid. And we see that in a very politicized debate at the moment, and ever more politicized debate in the last couple of years. But if we frame development or the possibility for people to develop and for nations to prosper, and for accessing people in need and providing them with what is necessary to save their lives, we could also frame that as a narrative of mutual benefits, because a resilient global community is helping us all, and is also creating a world where everyone can prosper in a way. So the vice versa version, this would be negative, it's not a positive narrative, but we could say by not doing so, no one of us can actually prosper, and we cannot development as a global community in any case. Yeah. So I think this is very much a question of narratives. And then I would like to touch upon a second point, and it is something that is probably somewhere between the practitioner's perspective of the organizations and the persons working there that I represent, and the academic discourse. And I'm not a scientist, so I'm sure there will be smarter people around here to frame, to describe that better. But I think the development discourse very much creates its own obstacles by not being bold enough to, not always being bold enough to frame the discourse as a discourse that is actually enabling people to prosper in their societies, to create, to make meaningful decisions, and to participate in their communities in a better way. Because I think the discourse, certainly in the last decades, maybe not so much today, so we are kind of improving, has very much focused on creating choices. And it's not about adding more choices for people, and I think it's also something you said, or someone already mentioned in a way today, but it's by giving them the possibility to make qualitative differences to their lives. Yeah, yeah, I would leave it with that. Thank you.
May I come in on the narratives part?
Definitely.
Yeah. No, I fully agree. I mean, we have this challenge in the decarbonization or climate change mitigation field as well, because, I mean, decarbonization, you're taking away fossil fuels, you're taking away carbon dioxide from people. Mm-hmm. And even though that might sound bad, because it's carbon dioxide, you're taking it away, right? So it's a loss. People feel like there's a loss involved. Mm-hmm. Instead of that, we're saying it's improving well-being for everyone, depending on how you do it, obviously. But there's a great leverage in the sense of if we change our systems, we can change them with several co-benefits for health, for mental health, physical health, so more social engagement if you have more active transport modes, for example, and you meet people, you don't sit alone in your car and get aggressive in the traffic jam, but you have positive encounters. So there's a lot of leverage in terms of like focusing on the well-being, and we are not there yet. I fully agree that the whole narrative is always focusing on what we are losing, what the change involves, but not what we are potentially gaining from it. Yeah.
But would you have experience from your research or what you observed that these narratives that come from science that are also loaded with a lot of terminology, as the discussion we are undertaking just now, and these complex concepts and models and everything, just like you were presenting now, science basically has solutions to climate change, or maybe not fully, but at least to a large extent, but they are not being implemented. Do you think it's because these narratives are contained within a relatively narrow, let's say, circle of people that are discussing it, like ourselves here in the room, perhaps? Should scientists be more engaged in spreading this narrative? So should we think of what kind of narratives this should be, or how do you think this can happen? And if you have any positive example that such narratives would actually, let's say, win hearts and could convince.
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to speak for all of the scientific community. I can only speak to some colleagues and myself in the beginning especially. We are not so great communicators, I would say. There is a lot we have to learn. And like when we work with colleagues like Gloria, to find different means of engaging with other audiences is definitely worthwhile. And we can learn a lot from professional science communicators, obviously, because that's their job. And also for the narratives, that you work with people, what resonates with them when they hear. And I mean, I did not participate in this Klimarat, the climate assembly in Austria, but I heard that this was also a big topic there, what topics triggered people in terms of like, why do they actually care? Why would you care about CO2 reduction, right? But you might care because the safety of your child improves if everybody bikes instead of big cars in front of the school, right? So, I mean, there's different hooks that you can take. From one insight from the Global Tipping Points report that we had, and this is a big challenge in terms of which narrative you pick for communicating these aspects. A lot of people have this notion, and I mean here, I don't know the psychological term, if you hear about negative climate tipping points, I mean, the world is lost, we don't have to do anything anymore. And then there's basically leads to inaction out of fear or frustration. But the same happens also on this positive social tipping points, because there's a feeling of inevitability that it happens anyways, and I don't have to do anything, and then we will be all saved. If those social tipping points fall from the sky, and then it's all fine, right? So there's a fine line in how you use them as positive imagery, that we still can do it, and there is opportunities for acceleration, but at the same time not give away this feeling of, okay, but you don't have to do anything about it, we all have to collectively do something. And then I think we are back to this collective discussion we had before.
May I add something? Yeah. So I think particularly if we talk about communication, I mean, there are some experts who do, like, I mean, there's a proper research field in this area, which I'm not a member of. However, so I think, so I'm also advising the WHO, and like what is very clear according to their guidelines is whenever there's a new health policy, you need to have community engagement from the beginning. And I think we are still very poor in doing that. Yeah. So from the very early, even when conducting research, yeah, sometimes we study things that are completely irrelevant to the practice. Yeah, not saying that this cannot be a lot of fun, but when we talk about like health policies, climate-related policies, we need to take the community from the beginning on board. And this is now actually the guidelines address that, and still in practice, we're not very good in doing that. Yeah, I mean, we've all seen that during the pandemic. Yeah, that there's a lot of potential for improvement. How to do that? So I think that is something that I would like to say. Community engagement. This requires connectors. So at the University of Vienna, just one example, we have just built a new research network, Health in Society, and I'm the co-director of that. And actually, most of the funding we have there, we give a little bit for research funding, yes. But what is the most important task of this is engage with the public. Yeah, go to the public, talk with them, and also let our research be inspired by that what comes from the public. Yeah, so this is what we need to focus more on.
And what has been the experience so far?
It has just started. We have not even all the people who will join the network.
Good luck with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, this communication, maybe we could continue a little bit on that since our conversation has gone into this topic. Listening also to Robert, I was thinking, so very often in the scientific community, we hear that we should engage, we should communicate, we should do all of these good things that you just said, and we definitely should, yeah, but it's always a two-way road, yeah, so one cannot engage if the other side doesn't engage, yeah, so again, would you have any further maybe insights into that or thoughts? We already said we should engage differently and better, that's for sure, but how to motivate the other side? And I'm talking less about the public, but I'm talking about policymakers mainly. So I think all researchers who are here, I'm sure would agree that because now this is a requirement on all projects or almost on all projects, you should have policy engagement. Yeah? You should have something or stakeholder engagement more broadly. And I think all of us know how difficult it is to actually organize that engagement for various reasons. Yeah? While for scientists, this has been put into criteria, into requirements. Does this happen also on the other side, or should this happen on the other side? So do you have any thoughts on that?
It's like a perfect question for you, isn't it? Yeah. Am I the worst?
Whoever wants to pick it up.
Yep. I have one example. I don't know if it's the proper answer, but I at least have a positive example that I can share. It's certainly also in line with the SDGs. I would say, well, if I'm asked what's the most important SDG, it's very hard to pick. But I would say, as an Austrian platform who is a convener and a facilitator, I would say SDG 17 is probably the most important. And within this SDG, there's a lot of room to exploit the possibilities of creating multi-stakeholder platforms. Yeah. So I think any initiative on really any public topic, be it technology or infrastructure, or be it health, or also be it foreign policy and development policy or humanitarian policy, should really come together in multi-stakeholder platforms, convening members from the scientific community. That's something that we lack in Austria permanently, especially in the development and humanitarian scene. This is where I can say so for sure with some authority, because there's lack of funding, yeah? There's lack of awareness, and so on and so forth. And then also bring together policymakers, civil society experts, at some points also the political level, in a way, bring them in at proper points, look out for the tipping points where they would be necessary to actually create meaningful change. And one example for how this can just come together and work out beautifully would be something, again, that was also mentioned today, was the compiling of the second voluntary national review in Austria on achieving the SDGs and the Agenda 2030. And this is really a perfect example of a multi-stakeholder platform as a whole, and also in its different breakout teams that were creating it. And I think from the scientific point of view, very statistical, for example, to the presentation, this was the full package that a lot of initiatives could learn from, I guess.
Yeah, I would like
like to second this, because while you started talking, I was thinking of the first voluntary national report that I was also luckily involved in, and this was a great experience. I have to agree on this. For me, it was a great learning to see the perspectives of the different ministries, also understand maybe tensions between the different ministries. This is just interesting for a researcher to learn about. Yeah.
Colleagues, are there comments or questions from the audience to everything you have heard so far? Many? Should we start here?
Oh, thank you very much. My name's Martin Nazirki, and I'm the director of the United Nations Information Service here in Vienna. So on the other side of the not quite overflowing Neue Donau, but certainly very high. So we heard from Christian Kerbel, Professor Kerbel, earlier about the elephant in the room. I guess maybe it sounds a bit zoological, but I think there's another elephant in the room, and that's the Summit of the Future, which takes place literally within 3 or 4 days. And a lot of the topics that have been mentioned are going to come together there. In New York. We hope that the Pact for the Future that's being developed by member states will reach consensus and will have the ambition that we've been looking for. It certainly seems to be going in a good direction. Obviously, we heard about polarization in the world, and this has had an impact. But the Summit of the Future provides an opportunity for so many of the different topics that have been raised. And that the 2 annexes that go with this, one of them is directly relevant to your comments, Gloria, about addressing future generations and hearing from them. One of the documents that will be approved, agreed by consensus, we certainly hope, is precisely to give a voice, in a sense, to the future generation that's not yet born, and how we take them into account. So I think that there is a positive story there. So this is on the intergovernmental side, if you like. And then the process to get there, rather as you mentioned, Lucas, the fantastic example of the voluntary national review, this time and the first one, bringing so many different actors together. The same is also true of the process to get to the summit, that it's not just the ambassadors in New York, important though they certainly are, but civil society representatives met in Nairobi in May. This was a huge stepping stone towards New York, and even at a local level here in Vienna, we've ensured, and I know that Monica at the Ban Ki-moon Center has done similar work with her fantastic team to make sure that the voices of young people are heard on that road. And then just finally connecting with the local community, how can we, to the point that you've been mentioning quite a lot, Professor Böhm, between the collective and the individual, and how can you break through to people, to the local population. What we did here is to work with the Kai Libre Street Art Festival at the Vienna International Center, so that a street artist would come and paint a huge mural on the side of one of the towers, the rather austere towers at the Vienna International Center. And I invite you, the U1 is running, so I invite you to take the subway out to the other side of the river and look at the tower, and you can see a representation, a hopeful representation that helps us on our way. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for sharing these interesting facts. Anybody else? Perhaps, gentleman there? Yeah, Monica.
I'm lucky. I have a question to the panel. I am a fan of scientific communicators who are really doing a great job. And one of my rock stars is Jon Rockström, who you surely all know. But I am in search of new ones, and I would love to hear your hints of who can I watch out for and who can I recommend to young fellows, mentees, global scholars who are rock stars in communicating science.
Would you have ready answers?
I would have said Rockström, but that is a
While they are thinking, perhaps the gentleman there.
Thank you very much that I was invited. Concerning the human agency in this issue, and I have started with this sustainability research around 2005 with the cultures of biodiversity, aka Vavilov cultures in Peru, and the impact of climate change. Then we made summits about climate change and water, very accurate now, because we have enough water. And the point is, we opted, in this case, for people who can benefit from what we call the turn towards sustainability, if you remember Narodowski and the pioneers. These were the indigenous people of Peru, the Quechuas, which have about 10 million people or more than Austria has inhabitants. What happened? The entire project came to an end, maybe due to, let's say, malevolent agents of influence against this project, because the turn towards sustainability reevaluated and upvaluated the agency of the indigenous people, because they knew how to run a Vavilov center. They were members of a Vavilov culture, but they were misfits in terms of the so-called elites, or let's say malfunctional elites. Therefore, my question is there any strategy or any contingency plan against, let's say, malevolent influencers, malevolent agents, and can you identify those social groups who can benefit from the turn towards sustainability and make them socially resilient? Because I knew this struggle since 2005. Thank you very much.
Yeah, that's definitely a very important observation and valid in many countries in the world. Perhaps Lucas, would you be able to comment on that?
It's a tough one, but I'll try. Well, I pointed out that the organizations we as a platform to represent are very much in touch with indigenous groups, for example. Yeah? And I think one thing to point out here is that civil society organizations who do work with vulnerable populations, most of the time also indigenous groups, are really the ones who push that trend line that we have seen for the Human Development Index up, yeah, and so it's about empowering those who don't have a say in the end, yeah? Because this trend line cannot be pushed up if we are not in touch with indigenous groups, for example, and so on and so forth. And I think in the end, basically every day I'm asking myself, what in the world is proper advocacy in the end, and who do we advocate for? And in the end, of course, I mean, as a platform, my standard answer would be, of course, it's my member organizations. And if I go a bit further and if I'm a little bit more bold, it's those people they work with, like the indigenous groups. Or vulnerable populations, marginalized groups, and so on and so forth. But in the end, it's those who are not yet born. And it's something that's why I very much like the idea of actually going back and forth in time and asking what would be needed and how was the world perceived at a different stage. And I think advocacy in terms of or translating science into actually advocacy for vulnerable groups or indigenous groups and the like is really an exercise of of operational sustainability management in a way, because it actually empowers those, or gives those who are not yet born a voice in a way, and represents them. And this is also the question about the summit for the future. I mean, in the end, it's not about getting, it's about getting it right so that future generations can live and prosper in a way as well. And of course, also giving agency to the people who are in need at this point, or who are vulnerable at this point. But in the end, this is very much like the SDGs as a compass in a way. And I'm not sure, I'm really keen and interested in how the Summit for the Future will actually get ahead of the current status quo when it comes to this international compass, because I think the SDGs as a tool to advocate, to research, to operationalize change is really perfect, and I'm really interested in how they will actually reinvent the wheel, if that's possible at all, in a way. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. I've actually been wanting to ask this for a long time, ever since you mentioned population explosion, but in relation to poor people. And I was just thinking, there's also an unprecedented population explosion, but of extremely rich people. And people like this are the most driver of pollution, consumption. And this is something we don't mention nearly as enough as we should. I mean, there's this kind of weird sense of advocating for using reusable straws while someone just takes a jet and zips around the world 8 times, you know? This kind of world that we live in, this kind of inequality, is also an extreme driver of climate change. So I would like to have also some emphasis on this kind of aspect of it, and how in your work you have tried to also include that perspective.
Thank you. This goes back to this quantitative and qualitative agency that I think Lucas mentioned already before. So the number of choices, variety of those choices versus making conscious choices, and as Pat's presentation was saying, choosing reasons for making choices. Yeah, perhaps from the psychological perspective, you would like to comment on that further?
I think it's a very important remark. It's not addressed in our research at all, and you see that's already a problem. Yeah. So we rather work on how we can disadvantage, how we can, and we very little focus on the elites or on the dangers or yeah, on the bad consequences of this behavior. So I think it's an important remark, not addressed in our research so far, in my group.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I can speak to this. I also fully subscribe. It's very important. We do a lot of work on looking at the environmental impacts of different societal groups in terms of how the inequality with regards to energy demands, or then related also to carbon footprints, looks like. What is a minimum required level of energy services that one would need to have a good life? Is on the lower bottom, basically, but also what is the ceiling, yeah? What are sustainable consumption corridors? And this, of course, then leads to questions. If I have a certain ceiling of a resource and I have a certain floor, if I don't want to get out of these planetary boundaries, we'll come to a question of redistribution, because it's not only in terms of if I have a carbon budget and I cut it up the cake, it's also related to biodiversity, water, all kinds of other Earth system services. And so I agree, it's maybe not the elephant in the room, people look at it, but it's often the question of remodeling the entire economic system is kind of like lurking around. But of course, there's also scholars that look at degrowth and redistribution. Yeah.
Thank you, colleagues. Our time is up. Thank you all. So it's time to say all thanks. And of course, I start by thanking Pedro Conceicao for coming to us, for supporting or initiating this event, for being here with us today and sharing the very interesting findings of the Human Development Report. I thank all the speakers who also contributed their insights today and again in so diverse ways, and we touched upon so many different aspects and dimensions here. Of course, co-organizing institutions, first and foremost, the Austrian Academy of Sciences, who hosts us for the second time again. Thank you so much. Also, UNDP and the IIASA, of course. Audience, thank you for your questions. As always, we can't take all of them, but do engage with our speakers now, since we have the opportunity. And of course, the team that was behind the organizing all of this, the team was led by Viktor Bruckmann on the side of the Austrian Academy of Sciences and Sergei Sizov on the side of IIASA, and also colleagues at the Human Development Report Office who supported us remotely. Thank you all. Thank you for coming, and stay in touch. If you want to engage with us on this topic, contact us, and we look forward to the next opportunities to interact with all of you. Thank you. All the best. Goodbye.